Thank you so much. Good morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure and a real privilege for me to be here with you. I'll have to speak English, I'm sorry. I hope we can manage with that. I will try to learn Estonian for the next time, but it might take a while. Thank you so much for having us here, for having the European Commission as part of this conference, which is really very much appreciated. Thank you very much for the very warm welcome. I understand you've even organized a storm and an explosion of a gas pipeline, especially for this conference. So that's really quite remarkable, and it shows how timely and how important all of this is. These are truly exceptional times. We've never seen anything like this in our lifetimes. In recent weeks, Europe was battered by a series of extreme weather events. At the same time, we're facing a complex and rapidly evolving security context, as was mentioned. We're experiencing new types of security risks. And in the European Commission, we are convinced that European cooperation will be essential in addressing these risks. The road to a safer tomorrow, as the title of this conference says, will have to go through cooperation. Cooperation at all levels, within Estonia, between the local and the central level, but also cooperation and coordination with the European levels. Obviously, the responsibility for civil protection, for emergency management, is with member states. It's not with the European Commission. The European Commission has a very small, modest responsibility to support, facilitate, coordinate the European coordination around this. But we are convinced that European cooperation will become only more important in the coming years to deal with these increasing risks. And for that purpose, we have a framework in place at European level called the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism, which is a framework that brings together not only our 27 member states, but also 10 participating countries. Ukraine has recently joined, Moldova has recently joined this mechanism. So a total of 37 countries that work together on preventing crisis, on preparing for crisis, and on responding to crisis. And for that, we have set up a crisis center in the European Commission, the Emergency Response Coordination Center, which acts as the focal point for any country that is overwhelmed by a major crisis. So if Estonia or any of the other member states or even a third country needs assistance in the event of a major disaster, there is one phone number to call in Brussels, and we will then, from that crisis center, liaise and coordinate with all other member states to make sure that there is a coordinated European assistance provided to that request for assistance. During the first 15, 16 years of the existence of the civil protection mechanism, we had around 20, maximum 25 requests for assistance. So crisis where per year, so crisis where a country said, I need help. Over the last few years, we've had more than 100 requests for assistance. Last year, we even had more than 200 requests for assistance. So there is an exponential increase in the use of that mechanism to support each other. And that has very much to do with on the one hand, the increase in risks, on the other hand, the more diverse the nature of the risks, the fact that we're seeing many different types of crisis nowadays. And one part of that is climate change. Estonia might have been somewhat spared until now of the most brutal effects of climate change, but some of our other member states have really experienced climate change in its most brutal form over recent weeks. If you look at the forest fires, the wildfires in Europe, we keep yearly statistics on the total burned area for the EU as a whole, all of the European countries. And we see a continuous increase in the burned area from year to year. It continues to increase. This year we had again a 40% increase of the total burned area in the EU compared to the average of the last 20 years. This year we also had the sad record of recording the single largest wildfire ever recorded in European history. That was the fire in Alexandroupolis in Greece, a fire which burned more than 100,000 hectares. If you have difficulties visualizing 100,000 hectares, think big. It's a real big area. And of course, Europe is just one part of the extreme weather that we're seeing. We're seeing the same trends globally. For the first time, Canada asked the European Union for help to try and manage the wildfires in Canada that are still not under control today. They have been going on since May of this year. There's still several fires out of control in Canada right now. We have sent from Europe some 350 firemen and firewomen to help there for several weeks. So you can see that the world as a whole is grappling with these problems. It's not just about fires and more heat. We've also seen some of the worst floods ever in Europe this year. And what was unique this year was that on one single day, you had one country, Cyprus, asking for help to deal with forest fires. And on the same day, you had another country, Slovenia, asking for help with floods. So you see that climate change is manifesting itself in many different forms. Some of the floods we've seen this year in Italy, in Slovenia, in Greece have been really unparalleled. The amount of rainfall that Greece had to digest at a certain moment in August has never been seen before in Europe. No country would have been able to deal with that in a very good way. It would have been challenging for anybody. The same with Slovenia, the same with others. For Estonia, it might be storms, it might be different sort of things, but the message here is that climate change is there, and it's something we need to prepare for. While we're trying to prepare for climate change, we also have to take into account a security context that is becoming increasingly volatile, increasingly uncertain, complex, with new types of risks, hybrid attacks. I've for a long time been very skeptical about the notion of hybrid attacks. I thought it was something that was nice for academia to talk about in conferences. I had to correct my view on that because they're there. They exist, they're taking place, and we're seeing them. Think about the forced migration from Belarus to Lithuania last year. Think about the critical infrastructure disruption you saw in the Baltic Sea. We don't know yet what exactly happened yesterday in the Gulf of Finland, but it's not unlikely that it's a similar situation. And we have to add to that list something which is new for the civil protection services in the EU, and that's conventional war. We all thought this was something we had left behind. We thought this was something of the past. Many of the civil protection services across the European Union have disinvested, have stopped investing in preparing for armed conflict because we assessed the likelihood of having an armed conflict in the EU as extremely small. We have to change that. We are changing that. Countries like yours are taking the lead on this. Because of your geographic location, obviously, you are in a very difficult spot. You're in a situation of vulnerability. And so we really need to adapt now this European cooperation to also prepare for the possibility of armed conflict reaching the EU. So all of that together is creating major pressure on the civil protection services across the EU. And it's creating challenges that are new and that are a bit different from what we're used to work with. We need to think hard about conflict escalation in the war in Ukraine. How much worse can it get? Is there a potential of radiological or nuclear warfare in all of this, chemical warfare, and what would be the consequences for Europe of that? We need to think about spillover. Can that conflict spill over to some of our neighboring member states, etc.? So climate change, security, we have to add to that mix that there will always be the unexpected. There will always be things that we know can happen, but we hope don't happen. And on the 6th of February of this year, this was one of the nightmare scenarios we saw materializing. The earthquake in Turkey and the impact on Syria was probably one of the most tragic emergencies, crisis I have seen in the last 20 years that I've worked on these issues. It's also the example, and that's why I have it here, that made me most proud of the European cooperation we have, because it really worked. We really could show that by working together, we can make a difference. I'm not going to go into any sort of detail, but just look at the timeline. On the 6th of February, around 4 o'clock, this major earthquake happens. 1 hour and a half later, that's 90 minutes, AFAD, the Disaster Management Authority in Turkey, decided to activate the civil protection mechanism and ask for help. That is extremely fast. I think very few countries would be able to make that decision to ask for international help so quickly. But it allowed us to react very quickly. By 8 o'clock in the morning, so we're talking 4 hours after the earthquake happened, we had the first offers of search and rescue teams in our system. By 9 o'clock, they were accepted by Turkey. By early afternoon of that same day, the first European teams were arriving in Turkey. By end of day, they were operational. After 48 hours, we had more than 1,750 European rescuers working in Turkey. And in these first few days, they saved more than 100 lives. And for search and rescue, that's a big number. In parallel, we mobilized 6 field hospitals, which treated more than 18,000 patients in the first 2 weeks alone. So it really shows that by bringing together the best of our abilities, by working together, by reacting quickly, we can actually make a difference. We can really complement what needs to be done primarily at national level, but what can be usefully complemented and supplemented by other member states. I'm not going to go into any sort of detail on what happened in Libya just a few weeks ago, but again, a very tragic example. I just put it in the slides here because it shows that we can actually work in armed conflict situations. When the dam broke in Libya and some 4,000 people lost their lives, we very quickly were able to mobilize teams from France and Italy who went with military protection. I mean, they went with a military convoy. But there were civil protection people from France and Italy working in Libya together with the Libyan authorities in a very challenging security context. And a lot of other member states provided all sorts of in-kind assistance, from shelter to medical aid, etc., etc. So it just shows that armed conflict is something we can deal with. We can work in these circumstances. We're just always thinking of it as outside the European Union, not inside the European Union. And the exercise that we now need to make is to really prepare for that scenario as well. So what I'm presenting you is a pretty bleak picture. This is our new operating reality. And it will require an ambitious agenda for change. We need to adapt. We cannot just continue with business as usual. We need to deepen the civil protection cooperation at all levels, and it's particularly nice to hear about the work in the first panel that is taking place at Estonian level. It's great to see that civil protection is getting more budget, more people, more facilities, that there is work on the legal basis, etc. And I think it is exactly what is needed. We're giving that message to all of our member states. Civil protection is more important than ever before. It is now a good idea to invest in strengthening civil protection. We're also doing that at European level. We want to deepen the cooperation at European level as far as civil protection is concerned. We have this European civil protection pool, which is basically bringing together teams from all over Europe. They are on standby in their home countries. They are trained, they are exercised. They have to go through a quality reassurance process. They have to show that they can work according to our quality guidance. And then they benefit from some European funding for this. You have several teams in the pool, some in the pool and some on its way. And I can only encourage you to continue to do that. We need everybody to contribute to the pool. So these teams are available to respond very quickly in case of a major earthquake, or in case of a major emergency in general, sorry. The other layer that we have developed very recently, only over the last 2 years, is this rescEU. And rescEU is basically the strategic reserve that the European Union is building. So this is fully funded by the European budget. It is hosted in interested member states, so member states can volunteer to host a part of the strategic reserve. And it is available on a last resort basis to support member states in need of these items. What do we have in the rescEU strategic reserve so far? It's under development, but we have a strong focus for the time being on forest firefighting on the one hand, because there is a really strong need for that in one part of Europe. This is a fleet of forest firefighting aircraft, the Canadairs, as you know them from the images, helicopters also, lighter aircraft also. This year we have doubled the fleet because we see the wildfire risk becoming more important. So this summer we had a total of 28 aircraft available to support the member states who were experiencing wildfires. We also have put a strong focus on medical capacities and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear response capacities, where we are investing big money. We will have a total of around 3 million invested in overall the strategic reserve, and more than half of that will go to medical and CBRN. We really believe that after COVID, we need to be better prepared for health threats, we need to be better prepared for pandemics, and we need to be prepared for radiological, nuclear, chemical incidents, biological incidents, be it industrial incidents or armed conflict or terrorism, etc. But the risk is certainly increasing. So we have CBRN stockpiles with all sorts of therapeutics under development. Your Finnish colleagues are doing an important part of that work currently. There will be CBRN decontamination teams available as part of this, CBRN detection teams also. We're developing a relatively small medical evacuation capacity in order to get people out of an emergency situation where needed. We're building the biggest field hospital in the world. We have a very nice project where we are funding the development of an entirely new field hospital, which will bring together components from 10 different member states. And if you put all of that together, it will be a very, very large field hospital. They can also be mobilized separately, of course. And then we have relatively small reserves of shelter capacities, tents, containers, prefab houses. We're developing a transport and logistics capacity. We have in Poland a a relatively robust energy reserve in the sense of generators of different sizes, also developed because of the Ukraine conflict, of course. What we have seen in the case of Ukraine is that we need to innovate, we need to become better at what we do, and we need to become smarter about what we do. In the case of Ukraine, we received a request for assistance from Ukraine very early on. Since then, we have provided massive assistance. There has been in-kind assistance, all sorts of shelter items, field hospitals, medical equipment, medicines, school buses, all sorts of different things. Heavy equipment has been provided for a total value of around 800 million euros. So that's a significant amount of equipment, with the advantage that it's there immediately available, ready to use for our Ukrainian colleagues. What we have noticed is that we can multiply that assistance by working with new actors in all of this. And one of the new actors we are working with is the private sector, private companies. Companies are willing and can make a big contribution to disaster relief efforts. They are all, not all of them, but many of them are willing to make a contribution. Until recently, we didn't have the systems to integrate that into the overall approach. So what we've done now is set up a mechanism where private sector companies can donate equipment, items, all sorts of goods, which has to abide by certain quality standards because we want to send the right stuff. But if the quality standards are fulfilled, then we can integrate it into our rescEU stockpiles, and we treat it as a rescEU strategic reserve of the European Union. So, for instance, Ukraine has benefited from a lot of very technical, specialized material from electricity companies, all sorts of repair materials that they needed to repair the grid, which has been sent through this system. We're also taking a much more cross-sectoral approach. We can't just focus on civil protection or health. We need to reach out to the energy colleagues. We need to work with the agricultural sector. We need to work with the IT sector. We're providing lots of IT support to Ukraine right now. We're providing road salt to Ukraine because without road salt, the transport infrastructure will immediately come to an end in the winter, and it will be very difficult for Ukraine to continue to function. The other thing we need to do much more, in our view, is to look forward. We used to be very reactive, responsive, and we've become very good in that. A crisis happened somewhere, and we're very quick in reacting to that. What we're doing less good, in my view, collectively, is to try and anticipate, try and look forward, try and foresee what is coming next at us. And that's where we are developing the ERCC from a purely operational response center to what is also a smarter, forward-looking, anticipatory center, where we have a whole analytical team now that helps us in analyzing crisis. We have scientific networks all over Europe where we can tap into the expertise from scientific bodies within a couple of hours to understand what the impact of a crisis can be. Think about CBRN, for instance. You will need modeling very quickly. You will need to have expertise about how this, can it reach Europe or not, if there is radiation, what to do with the people fleeing from Ukraine, arriving on our borders, etc., etc. So scientific advice is going to be extremely important in all of this, and we're working hard on that. I'll give you one concrete example of anticipation. The Kakhovka Dam, when that dam was bombed by the Russians, it wasn't a surprise to us. It was a scenario that we had been working on for months. We had developed a full impact assessment of the loss of that dam. how quickly the water would reach Kherson and the different regions, etc. And that impact analysis had been shared with the Ukrainian authorities. And that allowed us and the Ukrainians to react very, very quickly. So it just shows that thinking about what may happen next makes a lot of sense. So what are we thinking ahead of in terms of our next few problems? CBRN incidents are very high on our list of concerns. We need to become better in preparing for that. In Ukraine, potentially also in the EU, mass evacuation is an area where we believe we can do better. Mass evacuations are extremely complicated. They require a lot of expertise and capacities, and it's something we have to look in more carefully. And I just want to finish by saying that we're working very closely with the 3 Baltic countries on trying to prepare for possible conflict spillovers, for mass evacuation scenarios, etc. I think it is extremely important that we can and will work together in case of need. So in conclusion, because I'm going into my excess time, we are navigating our way through a very challenging new landscape. I'm sure some tough choices will lie ahead of us. But one thing is clear in our view. We have a better chance of addressing these risks of the future if we all work together. If we try and approach this in isolation, it's doomed to fail. If we work together, we have a pretty good chance of being able to respond to these things. Ukraine has shown, the response that we have provided to Ukraine has shown how powerful we can be if we work together. Putin thought he could blackmail us by wiping out the energy grid in Ukraine. We've shown that there are ways to go around that. We've shown that we are standing by Ukraine, that we're helping them, that we'll make sure that they have the energy so that this war is not lost. And I think we really need to get hope out of that, and we need to really all work towards more cooperation in the future. And you can count on the European Commission's full support for that. Thank you very much.
Ja, Hans, suur aitäh ettekande eest ja selle lõpu mõtte eest samuti. Ukraina kriis kindlasti on nii-öelda ühendanud Euroopa riike selles kontekstis ja me oleme näinud ka, mida see riigikaitseliste tegevuste mõttes tähendab. Peamiselt valmisolekut rohkem panustada ja mingi selline mobiliseerituse parem tasand on kindlasti juba ka saavutatud. Mida on Ukraina kriis näidanud elanikkonna kaitses? Milliseid muutusi? Et üheskoos arusaadav, aga et võib-olla mõni näide, et mida on riigid teinud Ukraina sõja järel elanikkonna kaitse kontekstis?
I think it has been a wake-up call for many member states. Many have used this opportunity, this occasion, if I can call it like that, to really have another look at their civil protection system, how they work, how they are prepared, and to try and strengthen it. On the European side, we have really innovated enormously. For the first time, we have set up logistical hubs, which seems like a technical thing, but it has been a game changer. I mean, the difficulty for all member states is to bring assistance into Ukraine. And getting into a country that is at war is difficult for anybody. I mean, there are insurance issues, there are all sorts of safety and security issues. So we've created 3 logistical hubs on the European side of the border, where we bring the assistance from member states together, and from where on we then transport that assistance into Ukraine in an organized and coordinated way. We're finding that this is a much better way of dealing with these issues than what we've done before. And it probably shows that we have to learn in Europe to think big. We always tend to be very modest, very humble. We tend to be We have been spared of major disasters for a very long time. There has been a very long period where in Europe there hasn't been a 9/11 for Europe. In the US, you had 9/11, and that was the wake-up call. And from there on, you can see that the investment in preparedness in the United States has increased tremendously. That defining moment has never occurred in the EU until we had COVID and the war in Ukraine. And I think we're at that point now. I think we need to think big. We need to invest. We need to really strengthen our systems.
Thank you, Hans.
Welcome.
Thanks for presentation and also for this answer. Aitäh, teeme aplausi esinejale.